I hold the invitation that never came, as my son announces his retirement party to everyone but me. The morning light filtered through the kitchen window of the house I'd lived in for 37 years. Steam rose from my coffee mug, creating small ghosts that vanished before they could take shape. I had built my morning routine around small rituals like this: coffee at 6:30, toast with marmalade, the newspaper spread across the oak table my late wife Sarah had chosen decades ago. My phone buzzed with a text message from my neighbor Helen. She was forwarding something she thought I should see: a Facebook invitation, my son Michael's retirement party, 50 guests invited to celebrate his departure from the accounting firm he'd built with his business partner David Chen. The date was set for next Saturday, at the country club downtown. My name was nowhere on the guest list. I set the phone down carefully, the way you might handle something fragile that could shatter if moved too quickly. The coffee suddenly tasted bitter. I had been an accountant myself for 42 years. I had taught Michael everything about numbers, about building client relationships, about the patient work of earning trust one decimal point at a time. When Michael started his firm 8 years ago, I had been his first investor, $25,000 from my retirement savings. Not a loan, a gift from a father who believed in his son's vision. He had promised to pay me back when the business took off. The business had taken off. The promise had been forgotten. I folded the newspaper without reading it and walked to the living room. Family photos lined the mantelpiece like silent witnesses to better times. Michael at his college graduation, Michael's wedding to Jennifer, my granddaughter Emma taking her first steps, all of them smiling, all of them from before. The distance had grown slowly, like ice forming on a pond. First, the Sunday dinners became monthly dinners, then monthly became holidays only, then holidays became phone calls that grew shorter and less frequent. Jennifer had stopped including me in Emma's school events. Michael had stopped asking for my advice about the business. I had assumed it was natural. Children grow up, they build their own lives. I had told myself that space was healthy, that I should be proud of his independence. I had made excuses for the silence until silence became normal. But being excluded from his retirement party felt different. This wasn't about space or independence. This was about being erased. I pulled up Michael's business website on my laptop. His photo smiled back at me from the About Us page. The bio mentioned his education, his professional achievements, his commitment to client service. It mentioned David Chen as his trusted partner and co-founder. It mentioned his loving family, his community involvement, his plans for the future. It didn't mention me at all. Not the father who had taught him to read financial statements before he could drive. Not the man who had worked overtime to pay for his accounting degree. Not the investor who had believed in him when banks wouldn't return his calls. I closed the laptop and sat in the quiet house. The grandfather clock in the hallway marked the passing minutes with steady precision. Each tick sounded like a small judgment, measuring the distance that had grown between us. How long had I been invisible to my own son? The next few days brought subtle confirmations of my exile from Michael's world. Emma's soccer game happened on Wednesday afternoon. I had been attending her games for 3 years, sitting in the same spot on the bleachers, cheering for number 7 in the blue uniform. This week, I arrived to find the field empty. The game had been moved to Thursday due to weather concerns. No one had told me about the change. I sat in my car for 20 minutes, watching other families discover the same empty field. They pulled out phones and made quick calls. Within minutes, they had answers and directions to the new location. They drove away with purpose while I sat there feeling like a man who had missed an important memo about his own life. On Thursday, I drove to the correct field an hour early. I wanted to be certain I wouldn't miss Emma's game again. Parents began arriving in small groups, carrying folding chairs and thermoses of coffee. I recognized some faces from previous games. They nodded politely, but didn't approach for conversation. Michael and Jennifer arrived 15 minutes before game time. They set up their chairs on the opposite side of the field from where I sat. Jennifer waved to other parents and chatted easily with the mothers she knew. Michael checked his phone constantly and seemed distracted. Neither of them acknowledged my presence. Emma scored 2 goals that afternoon. I stood and clapped each time, hoping she might notice me and wave. She was focused on the game, on her teammates, on the celebration with her parents after each goal. I was background scenery, easy to overlook. After the game ended, I watched families gather their children and pack up their chairs. Michael's family walked directly to their car without glancing toward my section of the bleachers. Emma ran ahead, still energetic from her victory. Jennifer and Michael followed, discussing dinner plans I could overhear from 40 feet away. They were going to celebrate Emma's goals at her favorite pizza place, the same restaurant where I had taken Michael for his birthday every year, until he turned 16 and decided he was too old for father-son traditions. I sat in the empty stands until the maintenance crew arrived to collect forgotten water bottles and programs. The field looked different without children running across it, larger and more vacant, like a stage after the actors have gone home. That evening, I called Michael's house. Jennifer answered on the 4th ring. Her voice was pleasant but distant when she realized it was me. She said Michael was busy with work calls and couldn't come to the phone. She said Emma was doing homework and had an early bedtime. She said they were all fine, very busy, but fine. She didn't mention the soccer game or Emma's goals or the pizza dinner. She didn't ask about my day or suggest we get together soon. The conversation lasted less than 3 minutes and felt like a polite dismissal. I hung up and sat in my kitchen, looking at the phone as if it might ring again with better news. The house felt larger than usual, full of echoes and empty chairs. The retirement party invitation was still on my counter where I had left it, face down like a playing card I didn't want to reveal. Helen had meant well by forwarding it, but kindness sometimes carried sharp edges. Tomorrow would bring new evidence of my growing invisibility, and I would catalogue each instance with the careful attention I had once given to financial discrepancies. Something important was being hidden from me, and I was beginning to understand the scope of what I had lost. Friday morning brought the phone call that changed everything. I was watering the tomato plants in my backyard garden when my cell phone rang. The caller ID showed David Chen's number. David rarely called me directly. Our conversations usually happened through Michael, or at chance meetings around town. David's voice sounded strained, almost apologetic. He said he was calling because he thought I should know about something. He said he had assumed Michael had already discussed it with me. He said he felt uncomfortable being caught in the middle of a family situation. The words came slowly, carefully, like someone walking across thin ice. David told me about a conversation that had happened at the office 3 weeks ago. Michael had been discussing the retirement party planning with their assistant Rebecca. He had been reviewing the guest list, making notes about catering numbers and seating arrangements. Rebecca had asked about inviting me to the party. She had mentioned that she thought family should be included in important celebrations. Michael had been quiet for a long moment before responding. He had told Rebecca that I wouldn't be comfortable at the party. He had said that I didn't really understand his business success, that I had always been critical of his decisions. He had said that including me would create awkward conversations with his professional friends and clients. Then he had said something that David couldn't forget. Michael had told Rebecca that I had never really supported his business anyway. He said I had been reluctant to invest in the firm when it was starting. He said I had doubted his partnership with David from the beginning. He said that my absence from the party would be better for everyone involved. David's voice became quieter as he repeated these words. He said he had been surprised by Michael's comments because they didn't match his understanding of our relationship. He remembered my investment in the firm. He remembered my early encouragement and advice. He said he had tried to remind Michael about my financial support and involvement, but Michael had dismissed these contributions as minimal and forgotten. I stood among my tomato plants, holding the phone against my ear, feeling something cold settle in my chest. The morning sun felt less warm. The garden seemed to shrink around me. David continued talking, explaining his discomfort with the situation. He said he valued our friendship and didn't want me to feel excluded. He said he had wrestled with whether to make this call for several days. I thanked David for his honesty and ended the conversation quickly. I didn't trust my voice to remain steady for much longer. The tomato plants suddenly seemed like symbols of patience rewarded. I had tended them carefully, watering and pruning, and waiting for fruit that would eventually feed me through the summer months. I had applied the same patience to my relationship with Michael, believing that time and care would yield eventual closeness. But patience only works when both parties are tending the same garden. I walked back into the house and sat at my kitchen table. The retirement party invitation was still there, face down, like evidence of a crime I hadn't yet decided to investigate. Michael's version of our relationship was a fiction, but it was a fiction he believed completely. In his story, I was the absent father, the critical observer, the man who had never really supported his dreams. The truth was simpler and more painful. I had been erased not through dramatic confrontation, but through quiet revision. My contributions had been minimized until they disappeared. My presence had been reframed as absence. My support had been rewritten as doubt. I sat there for an hour, watching dust motes dance in the afternoon light streaming through my kitchen window. By evening, I had made my first decision about what came next. The weekend passed in deliberate solitude. I spent Saturday morning organizing my home office, sorting through files and documents I hadn't touched in months. Among the papers, I found the original investment agreement for Michael's firm. $25,000, documented and notarized, with terms that had never been honored. I also found the early business plan Michael had shown me 8 years ago. My handwriting filled the margins with suggestions and corrections, questions about cash flow projections, notes about tax implications, recommendations for client development strategies. He had incorporated most of my suggestions into the final plan he had presented to other investors. My influence was embedded in the foundation of his success, invisible but essential, like rebar in concrete. Saturday afternoon, I drove past the country club where his retirement party was happening. Cars filled the parking lot. People in business attire walked toward the entrance carrying gift bags and wearing celebration smiles. I recognized some faces from Michael's company website and social media posts. I didn't stop or get out of my car. I simply drove past, noting the scene like a detective gathering intelligence. The party looked successful. Michael looked happy in the glimpses I caught through the large windows facing the parking lot. No one appeared to be looking for missing guests or wondering about empty chairs. Sunday brought a different kind of clarity. I walked through my house, really seeing it for the first time in months. 3 bedrooms, 2 bathrooms, a kitchen I had remodeled 5 years ago, a living room filled with furniture Sarah had chosen before her death. The house was too large for one person, too full of memories that no longer included active participants. It was a museum of a family that had evolved beyond its original borders, but it was also completely mine. I owned the house outright, paid off through decades of careful mortgage payments. I owned the furnishings, the appliances, the small investments and savings accounts I had accumulated over 42 years of steady work. Most importantly, I owned the freedom to decide what happened next. That evening, I made a list of phone numbers I hadn't called in months. Business colleagues from my accounting days, friends from church, neighbors I had been meaning to visit, my sister Margaret in Phoenix, who had been inviting me to visit for 3 years. I made another list of monthly expenses and calculated how much money I would save if I made certain changes to my living situation. The numbers were encouraging. I made a third list of things I had always wanted to do but postponed because of family obligations that apparently no longer existed. Travel destinations, hobbies I had abandoned, skills I wanted to learn. By bedtime Sunday, I had filled 6 pages with plans and possibilities. The retirement party was over. Michael's celebration had happened without me, exactly as he had intended. But endings were also beginnings, and I was discovering that exclusion could be transformed into liberation. Monday morning would bring new purpose, and I was ready to embrace changes that had been building in silence for longer than I cared to admit. My son had taught me an unexpected lesson about independence, though not in the way he might have intended. The following weeks revealed how thoroughly Michael had rewritten our relationship for public consumption. I attended my monthly breakfast meeting with former colleagues from the accounting firm where I had worked for decades. These were men I had known for 20 years, friends who had watched Michael grow from a child into a successful businessman. During coffee, Tom Brennan mentioned seeing photos from Michael's retirement party on LinkedIn. He commented on how proud I must be of Michael's achievements. He asked about my own plans for spending more time with my son, now that Michael would have more flexibility in his schedule. I listened to Tom's assumptions about our close relationship and realized that Michael had been managing public perception for years. At professional events and social gatherings, he had apparently presented himself as the devoted son of a supportive father. The fiction served his image well. Successful people were supposed to have strong family relationships, clients trusted advisors who spoke lovingly about their parents and children. Michael's professional reputation was enhanced by the illusion of family closeness, but the performance was strictly public. Behind the scenes, I remained excluded from actual family events and decisions. Later that week, I drove to Emma's school for her spring music recital. I had been attending her school performances for 2 years, always sitting in the back row, always proud of her growing confidence on stage. This time, I arrived early to ensure good seating. Parents filed into the auditorium, chatting about their children's preparations and excitement. I recognized several faces from previous events. Mrs. Patterson, Emma's music teacher, approached me during the pre-show social time. She thanked me for being such a consistent supporter of Emma's musical education. She mentioned how much Emma appreciated having her grandfather in the audience. Then she said something that stopped me cold. She said Emma had been disappointed that I couldn't attend her birthday party last month. She said Emma had asked specifically about inviting me, but had been told I was unavailable due to health concerns. I had never been invited to Emma's birthday party. I had never been asked about my availability. Most importantly, I had no health concerns that would prevent me from celebrating my granddaughter's special day. Michael and Jennifer had used my supposed illness as an excuse to exclude me from Emma's birthday, while maintaining the fiction that they had considered including me. The performance began before I could process this revelation fully. Emma played a piano piece she had been practicing for months. Her small hands moved confidently across the keys, creating music that filled the auditorium with beauty and precision. I clapped enthusiastically when she finished, proud of her dedication and growth. She scanned the audience afterward, waving to her parents in the third row. Her eyes found mine in the back and she smiled before looking away to acknowledge other family friends. After the recital ended, I watched families gather backstage to congratulate their young performers. Michael and Jennifer stood with Emma, taking photos and accepting compliments from other parents. I remained in my seat until most families had departed. The auditorium grew quiet around me, stage lights dimming, chairs emptying one by one. My granddaughter was growing up with a carefully constructed understanding of my role in her life. Present for school events, absent for family celebrations, interested but distant, available but never essential. The pattern was becoming clear, and the intentionality behind it was no longer possible to ignore. That night, I began making phone calls to people who might provide additional perspective on how completely I had been removed from my son's narrative. The conversations would be illuminating in ways I hadn't expected. My investigation into my own family's perception of me yielded disturbing results. I called my sister Margaret in Phoenix, someone I spoke with every few months but hadn't visited in person for over 2 years. Our conversation began with typical updates about health, weather, and retirement activities. Then Margaret mentioned something that made me pause. She said she had been surprised to hear about my recent surgery from Michael when he called her last Christmas. She had wanted to send flowers or visit, but Michael had assured her that I was recovering well and preferred to rest quietly without visitors. I had never had surgery. I had never been seriously ill during the past year. Margaret continued talking, mentioning how thoughtful Michael was to keep family updated about my health situation. She said he had called her twice during my supposed recovery period, providing updates on my progress and thanking her for her concern. She asked how I was feeling now and whether the doctors expected any long-term complications from the procedure. I told Margaret there had been no surgery, no illness, no recovery period. The silence on the phone stretched for several seconds before she asked me to repeat what I had said. We talked for another 30 minutes, reconstructing the conversations she had with Michael over the past 6 months. He had painted a picture of a father dealing with significant health challenges, family stress, and increased need for rest and privacy. He had positioned himself as the caring son, managing my medical situation, while protecting me from additional social obligations and family expectations. Margaret was quiet for a long time after our conversation ended. She promised to call back after she had time to process what she had learned. The next day, I contacted my neighbor Helen, who had forwarded the retirement party invitation. Helen was 73, sharp, observant, and home most days. She noticed changes in neighborhood routines and kept informal track of who came and went from houses around us. I asked Helen about Michael's visits to my house over the past year. She thought carefully before answering. She said she had seen his car in my driveway maybe 3 times during the entire year. Always brief visits, usually less than an hour. She mentioned that Jennifer and Emma had stopped visiting completely sometime last spring. She said she had wondered about that change, but assumed it was related to busy schedules and growing family obligations. Helen asked if everything was all right between us. Her question was gentle but direct, the way neighbors ask when they sense something wrong but don't want to intrude. I told her we were working through some communication challenges. She nodded with understanding and offered to help if I needed anything. That evening, I called David Chen again. Our first conversation had been awkward for him, but I sensed he had more information he hadn't shared. David was more comfortable this time, less worried about betraying confidences. He said he had been thinking about our previous conversation and realized there were other details I should probably know. He told me about a partners' meeting 6 months ago where Michael had mentioned family stress affecting his work concentration. Michael had described ongoing concerns about my health and independence. He had talked about the challenges of managing elderly parent care while maintaining professional responsibilities. David said Michael had presented himself as someone balancing business obligations with increased family caregiving duties. The partners had been sympathetic and supportive. They had encouraged Michael to take whatever time he needed for family responsibilities. They had praised him for his dedication to caring for aging parents, but David had never seen evidence of these caregiving activities. My health seemed fine during our occasional encounters around town. I appeared independent and capable during our brief conversations. David said he had begun to wonder about the consistency between Michael's descriptions of our relationship and the reality he observed. By the end of the week, I understood the scope of Michael's deception. He had created parallel narratives about me, each designed to serve specific purposes. To professional colleagues and distant family members, I was the aging father requiring increased care and protection from social obligations. This narrative enhanced Michael's image as a responsible, caring son, while justifying my absence from events and celebrations. To close family members and immediate social circles, I was the distant, critical father who chose not to participate in family activities. This narrative freed Michael from obligations to include me while avoiding direct confrontation about our relationship. Both narratives served his needs perfectly while ensuring my isolation remained complete and seemingly voluntary. The systematic nature of this deception suggested planning and intention that went far beyond simple family disagreement. I began to understand that my exclusion was not accidental or emotional, but strategic and deliberate. Michael's confidence in his narrative control became increasingly apparent as spring progressed into early summer. I decided to test the boundaries of my supposed invisibility by attending public events where Michael might be present. The annual Chamber of Commerce networking breakfast seemed like a perfect opportunity. I had attended this event for 15 years as a member of the local business community. Michael arrived 20 minutes after the program began, scanning the room for business contacts and potential clients. His firm had been a chamber member for 6 years, and he was comfortable in this professional environment. I watched him work the room, shaking hands and exchanging business cards with practiced ease. He moved through conversations smoothly, discussing market conditions and regulatory changes with other financial professionals. When he reached the table where I was sitting with 3 other retired accountants, his composure faltered for just a moment. He recovered quickly, greeting the table with professional warmth while avoiding direct eye contact with me. He spent 5 minutes discussing industry trends with my tablemates, acknowledging me with a polite nod, but no conversation. To outside observers, we appeared to be acquaintances rather than family members. After he moved to another table, George Morrison commented on how professional and successful Michael had become. George mentioned that Michael must have learned excellent client skills from his father. He looked at me expectantly, waiting for proud father commentary. I simply agreed that Michael was indeed successful in his field. The following week, I encountered Michael and Jennifer at the grocery store. Emma was with them, pushing a small cart and helping select items from their shopping list. Emma saw me first and waved enthusiastically. She ran over to show me a book she was carrying about marine biology. She talked excitedly about a school project on ocean ecosystems. Michael and Jennifer approached slowly, their expressions polite but distant. Jennifer asked about my health in general terms. Michael checked his phone twice during our brief conversation. Emma asked if I wanted to come to her school's science fair next week. She said she was presenting her ocean project and hoped I could see her display. Michael answered before I could respond. He told Emma that I probably had other commitments that evening. He suggested that maybe I could see her project some other time. Emma looked disappointed but accepted her father's assessment without argument. She hugged me goodbye and returned to her parents' cart. I watched them continue shopping, Emma chattering about her project, while Michael and Jennifer discussed weekend plans that obviously didn't include me. That evening, I looked up the date and time for Emma's science fair. It was scheduled for Thursday evening from 6 to 8 o'clock. I marked it on my calendar and planned to attend regardless of Michael's assumptions about my availability. The science fair was held in Emma's school gymnasium. Students had set up displays throughout the room, demonstrating experiments and explaining their research to visiting families. I arrived 30 minutes after the event began, giving Michael and Jennifer time to tour Emma's project without encountering me immediately. Emma's display about ocean ecosystems was impressive. She had created detailed charts showing different marine food chains. Her presentation included information about coral reef conservation and the impact of climate change on ocean temperatures. I stood at the back of the gymnasium, watching families move between displays. Emma was explaining her research to a steady stream of visitors, confident and articulate about her findings. Michael and Jennifer stood near her display, photographing her presentation and chatting with other parents. They appeared proud and engaged, supportive of their daughter's academic interests. I waited until they moved to another section of the gymnasium before approaching Emma's display. She saw me coming and broke into a wide smile. For 10 minutes, she walked me through her entire project, explaining her research methods and sharing additional facts she hadn't included in her written presentation. Her enthusiasm was infectious, and her knowledge was genuine. Other families began arriving at her display while we talked. I stepped back to allow space for new visitors, but Emma called me back to introduce me to her teacher as her grandfather. Mrs. Chen thanked me for coming and commented on Emma's dedication to her project. She mentioned that family support was crucial for student success in science education. As I prepared to leave, Emma hugged me and thanked me for coming to see her project. She said it meant a lot to have me there. I drove home that evening, feeling something I hadn't experienced in months: connection, purpose, the reminder that relationships could still be genuine and reciprocal, even within my own family. But I also understood more clearly how deliberately I was being separated from these moments of connection. Michael's control was thorough, but not absolute. There were still spaces where authenticity could emerge if I was willing to seek them out. The realization that I could still access authentic relationships with Emma, despite Michael's barriers, led me to a broader understanding of my situation. I was not actually powerless in this family dynamic. I had been accepting exclusion as inevitable, rather than recognizing it as a choice that could be challenged through strategic action. My professional background had trained me to analyze complex financial situations by examining underlying structures and motivations. I decided to apply the same analytical approach to my family relationships. Michael's behavior suggested he was protecting something valuable that my presence might threaten. His systematic exclusion of me required ongoing effort and maintenance. indicating that my influence or knowledge posed some kind of risk to his current position. I spent several evenings reviewing everything I knew about Michael's business operations. His firm had grown steadily over 8 years, building a solid client base and maintaining consistent profitability. David Chen was an equal partner, and their working relationship appeared strong and stable. But Michael's retirement at 42 seemed unusually early for someone building a successful practice. Most financial advisors worked well into their 60s, accumulating clients and expertise that generated increasing income over time. I called David again, this time with specific questions about the firm's future plans after Michael's retirement. David sounded surprised by my questions. He said Michael hadn't actually retired yet. The party had been a premature celebration of his intention to step back from day-to-day operations, but the transition was still being negotiated. More importantly, David revealed that Michael had been pushing for changes in the firm's structure that David found concerning. Michael wanted to restructure their partnership agreement to give him greater control over client relationships and firm assets. David said he had been resisting these changes because they would fundamentally alter their equal partnership arrangement. He valued their collaborative approach and didn't understand Michael's sudden interest in assuming majority control. The conversation continued for 45 minutes. David shared details about Michael's recent behavior that painted a picture of someone positioning himself for a significant business move. Michael had been cultivating relationships with their largest clients, scheduling private meetings and dinners that excluded David. He had been discussing firm operations with their accountant and attorney without including David in those conversations. Most concerning, Michael had been suggesting to key clients that David might be planning to reduce his involvement in the firm due to family obligations. David said he had no family obligations that would affect his work commitment. He had no plans to reduce his role in the firm, but several clients had mentioned these conversations to him, asking about his future plans and expressing concern about continuity of service. After I ended the call with David, I sat in my kitchen for an hour, processing what I had learned. Michael was maneuvering to gain control of the firm he had built with David's equal partnership. He was using deception and manipulation to position himself advantageously for this business transition. His exclusion of me from family events wasn't primarily about personal relationship issues. It was about preventing me from observing or commenting on his business behavior during a critical period of change. My presence at social events would create opportunities for conversations with David and other business associates. My knowledge of Michael's character and history might lead to questions about his current actions. My absence was strategically important to his success in restructuring the firm to his advantage. But David had just provided me with information that could significantly impact Michael's plans. I now understood not only what Michael was doing, but why my exclusion had been so systematic and complete. The question remaining was what I intended to do with this knowledge. That night, I began developing a plan that would restore my voice to family conversations while addressing the broader issues David had revealed about Michael's business conduct. Michael had taught me the value of strategic patience, though he probably hadn't intended that lesson. Now I would apply that patience in ways he wouldn't expect. My plan required careful timing and precise execution. First, I needed to document my conversations with David Chen to ensure accuracy when the information became relevant. I wrote detailed summaries of our discussions, including dates, times, and specific statements about Michael's business behavior. Second, I researched the partnership agreement structure that David had described. My decades of accounting experience provided context for understanding how partnership agreements could be manipulated and what legal protections existed for equal partners. Third, I began rebuilding relationships that Michael's deception had damaged or interrupted. My sister Margaret in Phoenix, colleagues from my former firm, neighbors who had been told I was dealing with health challenges. Each conversation required careful explanation of the actual situation without appearing to attack Michael's character directly. I focused on clarifying facts rather than assigning blame. Margaret was particularly helpful in this process. She had been hurt by Michael's deception about my supposed surgery, and was willing to assist in restoring accurate communication with extended family members. She also provided insights about Michael's behavior patterns that I had overlooked during his childhood and early adulthood. His tendency to control narratives, his comfort with deception when it served his purposes, his skill at manipulating relationships to his advantage. Margaret reminded me about incidents from Michael's teenage years when he had created elaborate lies to avoid consequences or gain advantages. I had dismissed these episodes as normal adolescent behavior, but Margaret had observed a pattern of calculated dishonesty that concerned her even then. By the end of July, I had established a network of accurate communication that bypassed Michael's controlled narratives. Family members and friends now had direct access to information about my actual situation rather than relying on Michael's filtered reports. But the most important element of my plan involved Emma's school activities. Emma's 8th grade graduation was scheduled for the first week of August. This was a significant milestone that would involve extended family, friends, and community members. Michael and Jennifer would be expected to invite grandparents and celebrate Emma's achievements publicly. I waited for an invitation that never came. Instead, I received a phone call from Emma herself. She called on a Tuesday evening when her parents were at a school board meeting. She asked if I was planning to attend her graduation ceremony. I told her I hadn't received information about the date or time. She was quiet for a moment before providing all the details. She said she hoped I could come because she was receiving an award for academic excellence. I told her I would definitely be there and was proud of her hard work. After we ended our call, I realized that Emma's direct contact represented a crack in Michael's control system. His daughter was beginning to notice the inconsistencies between her parents' explanations and her grandfather's actual availability. That weekend, I drove to the school and purchased tickets for Emma's graduation ceremony directly from the main office. The secretary mentioned how excited Emma was about her academic award and how proud her family must be of her achievements. The graduation ceremony was scheduled for Thursday evening at 7 o'clock in the school auditorium. Extended family members and friends would be present, creating the perfect opportunity for my plan's final phase. David Chen would be attending the ceremony because his daughter was also graduating from 8th grade. This wasn't a coincidence I had orchestrated, but it was an opportunity I intended to use. Michael would be forced to manage public family dynamics in a setting where his usual control mechanisms wouldn't operate effectively. Most importantly, Emma would see that her grandfather valued her achievements enough to attend her graduation, regardless of family complications she didn't fully understand yet. Thursday evening would mark the end of my period of silent observation and the beginning of a very different kind of family conversation. The graduation ceremony would provide the perfect stage for restoring my voice to family discussions that had excluded me for too long. Thursday evening arrived with the kind of summer heat that made air-conditioned buildings feel like sanctuaries. I arrived at Emma's school 45 minutes before the ceremony began, ensuring plenty of time to find good seating and observe the family dynamics as they developed. The auditorium filled steadily with proud families, carrying cameras and flowers for their graduating 8th graders. I chose a seat in the 4th row, close enough to see Emma clearly, but positioned to observe Michael and Jennifer's reactions when they noticed my presence. David Chen arrived 20 minutes later with his wife and elderly mother. They sat 3 rows behind me, and David waved when he recognized me. His greeting was warm and genuine, the interaction of friends rather than distant business acquaintances. Michael and Jennifer entered the auditorium 10 minutes before the ceremony began. They were accompanied by Jennifer's parents, who had driven from Indianapolis to attend Emma's graduation. Michael scanned the audience as they found their seats, his eyes stopping when he located me in the 4th row. His expression tightened almost imperceptibly before he returned his attention to his in-laws and the ceremony preparations. Jennifer's parents were people I had met occasionally at family gatherings over the years. They had always been polite and inclusive, treating me as Emma's grandfather rather than an uncomfortable family obligation. The ceremony began with the traditional processional music. 83 8th graders filed into the auditorium wearing navy blue caps and gowns, their faces showing a mixture of excitement and nervousness about this milestone transition. Emma looked confident and happy as she took her place with her classmates. She spotted her family in the audience and waved to the group, including me, in her enthusiastic greeting. The principal delivered opening remarks about achievement, growth, and future possibilities. Several teachers spoke about the graduating class and their accomplishments over the past year. Then came the moment I had been anticipating, the presentation of special awards for academic excellence. Emma's name was called as the recipient of the Mathematics Achievement Award. She walked across the stage with poise and confidence, accepting her certificate and posing for photographs with the school principal. I applauded enthusiastically, standing with other proud family members to honor her accomplishment. Jennifer's parents stood as well, beaming with pride at their granddaughter's recognition. Michael and Jennifer remained seated, applauding politely, but without the enthusiasm I would have expected for such a significant achievement. After the awards presentations, individual diplomas were distributed in alphabetical order. When Emma's name was called for her graduation certificate, the entire family section erupted in cheers and camera clicks. Following the ceremony, families gathered in the school cafeteria for a reception, with refreshments and informal celebration. This was the setting where my plan would reach its conclusion. I approached Jennifer's parents first, congratulating them on Emma's achievements and asking about their drive from Indianapolis. They were delighted to see me and immediately began sharing stories about Emma's academic success and summer plans. During our conversation, Jennifer's mother mentioned how much Emma had been looking forward to having her grandfather attend the ceremony. She said Emma had been worried I might not be able to come due to health concerns, but was thrilled when I confirmed my attendance. I clarified gently that I had no health concerns that would prevent me from attending Emma's important events. Jennifer's mother looked confused and asked about the surgery that Michael had mentioned during their last phone conversation. Before I could respond, David Chen joined our group with his family. He introduced his wife and mother to Jennifer's parents, and conversation shifted to comparing notes about their daughter's middle school experiences. During this discussion, David's mother mentioned how nice it was to see families celebrating together despite the challenges that sometimes develop between different generations. She said family unity was especially important during milestone events like graduations. David looked at me meaningfully and asked how I was feeling after my recent recovery period. His question was loud enough for Jennifer's parents to hear clearly. I responded that I hadn't had any recent health issues requiring recovery time. I said I had been in excellent health throughout the spring and summer. The confusion on Jennifer's parents' faces was immediate and obvious. Jennifer's father asked directly about the surgery that Michael had described during their Easter phone call. He said they had been concerned about my recovery and had wanted to visit, but Michael had assured them I needed rest and privacy. I explained calmly that there had been no surgery, no illness, and no recovery period. I said I had been available for family events throughout the spring, but hadn't received invitations to most gatherings. David's wife looked uncomfortable as she began to understand the family dynamics she had inadvertently walked into. But David himself seemed relieved that the truth was finally emerging in a public setting where it couldn't be dismissed or reframed. Jennifer's mother asked about Emma's birthday party in March. She said they had sent a gift, but were disappointed to hear that I couldn't attend due to health concerns. I told her I had never been invited to Emma's birthday party and had learned about it only weeks later through indirect sources. The small group around us had grown quiet. Other families continued their celebrations nearby, but our corner of the cafeteria had become an island of tense revelation. Jennifer approached our group, having noticed the serious tone of our conversation. She greeted her parents warmly and asked about their discussion. Jennifer's father asked directly about my health situation and the conflicting information they were hearing. His question was respectful but firm, the tone of someone seeking clarity about concerning discrepancies. Jennifer's face reddened as she realized what was happening. She looked around the group, gauging who had heard what information and how much damage control would be required. Before she could respond, Emma bounded over to our group, still wearing her graduation cap and carrying her achievement award. She thanked me enthusiastically for coming to her ceremony and said it meant everything to have her grandfather there for such an important day. Jennifer's mother asked Emma if she had been worried about my health problems preventing my attendance. Emma looked genuinely confused. She said I seemed fine whenever she saw me and asked what health problems her great-grandmother was referring to. The moment stretched awkwardly as multiple family members waited for explanations that would reconcile the contradictory narratives they had been hearing. Michael appeared at Jennifer's side, having noticed the gathering and sensed the tension from across the cafeteria. His professional smile was in place, but his eyes showed the wariness of someone walking into an unstable situation. David stepped forward and addressed Michael directly. He said he thought this might be a good time to clarify some family communication issues that had been causing confusion for several people. Michael's composure held, but I could see the calculation behind his eyes as he assessed the scope of what had been revealed and what damage might still be contained. Jennifer's parents were watching this exchange with growing concern. These were people who valued family harmony and honest communication. The emerging pattern of deception was clearly troubling to them. Emma was still standing beside me, holding her award, beginning to sense that adult tensions were developing around topics she didn't understand. I placed my hand gently on Emma's shoulder and told her how proud I was of her achievements and how grateful I was to be included in her special day. Then I looked directly at Michael and said quietly that we needed to have an honest conversation about family relationships and communication patterns that weren't serving anyone well, especially Emma. The cafeteria was beginning to empty as other families headed home, but our group remained fixed in place, surrounded by the remnants of celebration and the weight of long-overdue truth-telling. Michael's carefully constructed narratives were unraveling in exactly the public setting where he was least equipped to manage the consequences. The graduation ceremony had ended, but the real education was just beginning. 6 months later, the changes in our family dynamics were as thorough as they were unexpected. Michael and Jennifer had been forced to confront the web of deceptions they had created during a series of difficult conversations that followed Emma's graduation. Jennifer's parents had demanded explanations for the health stories and social exclusions that made no sense when examined closely. More significantly, David Chen had used the information about Michael's partnership manipulation attempts to protect his own business interests. When Michael tried to implement his restructuring plans in September, David was prepared with legal documentation and witness statements that prevented the hostile takeover attempt. Michael's reputation in the local business community suffered considerably when details of his deceptive practices became known through professional networks. Several clients transferred their accounts to other firms, and his retirement celebration proved premature when he was forced to continue working to rebuild lost revenue. But the most important changes involved Emma and our relationship. Emma had begun asking direct questions about the inconsistencies she had observed in her parents' explanations about family relationships. She was old enough to recognize deception and smart enough to seek truth from multiple sources. I had been completely honest with her about the communication problems that had developed between her parents and me. I explained that adults sometimes make mistakes in relationships, just like children do, and that fixing those mistakes requires honesty and effort from everyone involved. Emma started calling me directly when she wanted to share news about school or ask questions about topics that interested her. These conversations happened without her parents' filtering or interference. I attended her high school orientation, her first volleyball game, and her science Olympiad competition. Emma made sure I received information about events that mattered to her, regardless of whether her parents extended official invitations. Jennifer's relationship with me had improved significantly once the deceptive communication patterns were exposed and addressed. She admitted that Michael had convinced her I was critical of their parenting and uninterested in family involvement. When she realized these characterizations were false, she made genuine efforts to rebuild our connection. Michael's adjustment to the new family dynamics was more difficult. He was forced to acknowledge his deceptive behavior, but his apologies felt strategic rather than genuine. He seemed more concerned about managing the consequences than understanding the damage his actions had caused. I had sold my large house in October and moved to a smaller place closer to Emma's school and activities. The decision felt liberating rather than diminishing. I was building a life that fit my actual needs rather than maintaining a museum of what used to be. My relationship with David Chen had evolved into a genuine friendship. We met monthly for breakfast and occasional golf games. He had offered me consulting opportunities with his firm, which provided intellectual stimulation and supplemental income. Most importantly, I had learned that exclusion only works when the excluded person accepts it as permanent. My silence had enabled Michael's deception, but my voice could restore truth and connection when I chose to use it. On Christmas morning, I sat in Emma's living room watching her open presents and demonstrate the robotics project she had been building for a school competition. Jennifer's parents were visiting from Indianapolis, and the conversation was easy and inclusive. Michael was present, but subdued, still adjusting to family dynamics that no longer revolved around his narrative control. He was learning to participate in relationships rather than manage them. Emma looked up from her robotics demonstration and asked if I wanted to help her with the programming challenges she was encountering. She said my accounting background might provide useful perspective on the logical sequences involved. I agreed enthusiastically, and we spent the next hour working together on code that would enable her robot to navigate obstacle courses more efficiently. Jennifer's mother commented on how wonderful it was to see 3 generations collaborating on such an interesting project. She said these kinds of shared activities were what family celebrations should really be about. As afternoon shifted toward evening, I reflected on the year's changes and the education I had received about family relationships, deception, and the power of strategic truth-telling. Michael had taught me that silence could be weaponized, but I had learned that authenticity could be equally powerful when applied with patience and precision. Emma was growing up with a grandfather who chose presence over resentment, truth over convenience, and connection over control. That seemed like the most valuable inheritance I could provide, though it wasn't anything I could have planned or predicted when this story began. The invitation that never came had ultimately led to invitations I created for myself, relationships I rebuilt through honest effort, and a family dynamic based on truth rather than manipulation. Sometimes the best revenge is simply refusing to disappear when someone wants you to become invisible. I was still here, still present, still choosing engagement over exile, and that choice had made all the difference.